in the wake of the death of George Floyd, the man who was killed by the Minneapolis police when one officer knelt his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck for, I'm told, 8 minutes. I've also heard 9 minutes. And shortly thereafter, after Floyd was taken away by paramedics, he died. 4 officers involved were summarily fired, and one has since been arrested and charged with third-degree murder. Now, I think the president should make an address, and I hope that he will. And I hope what he does is what I spent time doing this weekend on social media, and that is putting out the facts. And the facts don't care about what you perceive to be the legacy of race and racism. The facts don't care about your hostility towards the police. And Lord knows there are bad cops. And a bad cop can do a great deal of damage. And they have, and they do. But the facts are that in the last 5-6 years, the numbers of people killed by the police have been about the same, 1,000. Of that number, 500 of them have been white, on average, and 250 of them have been black on average. On average, as many unarmed whites are killed as are unarmed blacks. I defy most of my audience to cite an unarmed white person who was killed. And the reason for that is because when an unarmed white person is killed, the media cares a whole lot less. I was in Fresno in 2016. We have an affiliate in Fresno. And a young man, 19 years old, was driving erratically. Police followed him, gets out of his car. They order him to show his hands, show your hands, show his hands. He doesn't. He's shot 4 times. He's killed. He's white. And you don't know his name, and I don't know his name because he was not made a cause celeb. But had he been black, he would have been on the list of your people that you can rattle off as having been a victim of what Black Lives Matter and others considers to be systemic, structural, institutional racism. I would talk about the fact that if I were Trump, according to the CDC, in the last 45 years, police shootings against blacks have declined 75%, while police shootings of whites have flatlined, even though whites are 1/7 as likely to commit murder as blacks. Of the nation's homicides, half of them involve a black victim, and most of those black victims involve a black perp. Interracial homicide is rare, but when it does happen, and there are approximately 750 such cases every single year, 500 whites are killed by blacks, 250 blacks are killed by whites. So blacks, 13% of the population, are killing twice as many whites, who are at 61% of the population. I would also talk about the fact that a young black man is at least 7 times more likely compared to a young white man of being a victim of a homicide. And almost always the perpetrator of said homicide is another young black man. I would talk about the fact that in many of these cities where these riots are taking place, they're run by Democrats. Democrats have chosen the top law enforcement officials. And the reason for this is MLK once said that riots are the language of the unheard. How is it that people are unheard when, for example, in Baltimore in 2015, when Freddie Gray died in police custody, the mayor, black, all of city council, 100% of it, Democrat, majority black, the state attorney who brought the charges against the 6 officers, black, 3 of the 6 officers, black, the judge before whom 2 of the officers chose to try their cases without a jury, black, who, by the way, found those 2 officers not guilty, the United States attorney at the time, black, the United States president at the time, black. So how is it that rioters in Baltimore were rioting if rioting is the language of the unheard when you have all these black public officials running the city. I would also talk about the fact that you take a city like Minneapolis, a long, proud tradition of being progressive. It's a city where Hubert Humphrey, later on vice president under Lyndon Johnson, was mayor, and he forced the Democrat Party to include a civil rights plank in their party platform in the 1948 convention that caused a whole bunch of Southern Democrats, later on known as the Dixiecrats, to walk out. That's the proud tradition of that city. This is not like we're talking about Birmingham, Alabama, where you had a sheriff like Bull Connor who was sicking dogs and turning water hoses on black civil rights workers. Minneapolis has a young left-wing mayor. The vice president of city council is black. The state attorney in Minnesota is black. And the congressperson representing that district, Ilhan Omar, is a, quote, person of color of Somali American origin. And speaking of protests, I grew up in the 50s. I grew up in the 60s. I saw these protests. MLK, the Congress of Racial Equality, the Southern Negro Coordinating Committee, all of these major civil rights groups, the Urban League, they were fighting discrimination, actual, serious, real discrimination in law and in fact. It was true that you had to sit at the back of the bus. That led to the Birmingham bus boycott. It was true that you could not work in department stores, yet they expected you to patronize them. Thus, the boycotts against department stores. It was true that you could not sit anywhere you wanted to sit in a movie theater, thus the boycotts of movie theaters. And for a long time, it has been true that the police have engaged in brutal behavior against black people. But this is 2020. We just had 8 years of a black president of the United States. We had 8 years of back-to-back black attorneys general. What makes you think that the investigation of these officers is going to be anything other than thorough? You may not like the outcome, but what makes you think it's not going to be thoroughly investigated? This is not Emmett Till, killed in Mississippi, thrown in the river, evidence covered up, all white jury convicted knowingly guilty people. We're not talking about right now. This is 2020. And to act as if it's the same America as it was before is to desecrate the hard work and the honor of so many men and women who worked so hard to get us to the point where somebody like Barack Obama could get elected and reelected. Unbelievable. That's what I would do if I were the president. I would lay out the facts. It is rare for the police to kill anybody